The American Civil War, by the summer of 1863, had ceased being a romantic exercise in military parades. It had settled into the grim, muddy reality of mutual slaughter. But even amidst this grand, tragic conflict, to determine the fate of a nation, the most pivotal moments often hinged on the utterly mundane, like shoes. Like, say, a pair of new shoes. General Robert E. Lee, a man whose reputation for strategic genius was well earned, was currently riding high on a series of Confederate victories, his Army of Northern Virginia. His Army of Northern Virginia, lean, hungry, and dangerously confident, was marching into Pennsylvania. Lee's objective was not merely to win another battle, it was to perform a psychological operation. He wanted to menace Washington, D.C., spook the Union, and generally make such a nuisance of himself to them that the Northerners would scream enough and beg for peace. Lee commanded 70,000 men. They were tough, loyal, and in dire need of basic logistics, specifically footwear. Standing against him was the Union's massive Army of the Potomac, 93,000 strong, now under the weary command of Major General Meade. Major General George Meade was a competent, if perpetually stressed man who had inherited the job recently after the last guy, General Hooker, had decisively failed to defeat Lee at Chancellorsville. Meade was chasing Lee north, glumly trying to keep up, like a very large, expensive basset hound. The armies were circling, but no one expected a decisive engagement, certainly not here, outside the tiny, unremarkable town of Gettysburg, Pennsylvania. The war that decided the fate of the Republic started, quite literally, as an accidental brawl. Act 1. The Logistics of Disaster. The air. On June 30th, 1863, the air was thick with summer heat and the general aroma of 70,000 unwashed soldiers. A brigade from Confederate General A.P. Hill's 3rd Corps was marching toward Gettysburg for a purpose. Their stated purpose was to secure supplies, but their real purpose was whispered excitedly through the ranks. It was much more specific. Shoes, declared Corporal Jenkins to the man marching next to him, Private Toby. I heard they got barrels of them, fresh northern leather. Not these holes wrapped in hope, Toby replied. Hope is not waterproof, Jenkins, Toby replied miserably, shifting his weight to avoid rubbing a blister. Rubbing a blister the size of a fig. The brigade was being led by General Henry Heath, a divisional commander who, despite his high rank, possessed the uncanny ability to be wrong about everything important. As they approached Gettysburg, they encountered a small, unexpected annoyance. Union cavalry. This was reported. Reported back to Heath, who listened patiently, a vein pulsing near his temple. Cavalry, Heath scoffed, waving a dismissive hand. Nonsense. Must be local militia. Pennsylvania boys playing dress-up, tell them. Tell them to turn around, clear the field, and let us get those boots. My boys are suffering from foot decay. The message was relayed up the chain to the Corps commander, General A.P. Hill, a man with a distinct red shirt and an even more distinct oversupply of confidence. Hill considered the report. Cavalry, eh? General Heath is right. Some ragtag local force trying to look tough. We are the Army of Northern Virginia. We do not get blocked. We do not get blocked by weekend warriors. Hill made a fatal, hubristic error, assuming the Union presence. Presence was negligible. He authorized Heath to take 2 full divisions into Gettysburg, not to fight a battle. Not to fight a battle, mind you, just to conduct a robust reconnaissance. A fancy term for telling the locals loudly and with fixed bayonets to hand over the footwear. What neither Heath nor Hill knew was that these were not local Pennsylvania militia. They were seasoned veterans from the Army of the Potomac. Under the command of Brigadier General John Buford, Buford's cavalry division had spent the morning scouting, and they were very good at their jobs. More importantly, they were the vanguard of the entire Union Army, which was inconveniently positioned just a short, urgent ride behind them. Hill's divisions marched forward on the morning of July 1st, expecting a quick sweep. Instead, they got a fight. Act 2. The hero, who arrived too early. The moment Heath's advance guard clashed with Buford's dismounted troopers, west of Gettysburg, Buford did not hesitate. He was not equipped for a sustained fight, but he knew the landscape, and critically, he knew the map. He saw the rolling hills and ridges, specifically Cemetery Hill and Ridge, as the perfect place to fight a major defensive battle. He just needed to buy the main Union force for hours. "Hold the line, boys," Buford barked, his eyes scanning the horizon. "The longer we hold this ridge, the better the ground we save for the real fight." Buford's cavalry, fighting like infantry, performed brilliantly, stubbornly holding the Confederates back long enough for the first Union infantry reinforcements to arrive. The vaunted 1st Corps, led by the beloved and highly competent Major General John F. Reynolds. He rode. Reynolds was the kind of general the troops respected. He was calm, decisive, and had a reputation for skill. For not tripping over his own strategic feat, he rode onto the field, surveyed the unfolding chaos, and saw a simple reconnaissance mission gone national, and instantly understood the strategic importance of the ridges. Buford Reynolds yelled, riding up amidst the crackle of skirmish fire. "You have bought us time. We hold this. We hold this ground. Get the Iron Brigade into McPherson's woods." The Iron Brigade, a ferocious unit composed mainly of Western men, was the federal equivalent of a battering ram. Reynolds personally led them toward a crucial patch of timber, his presence inspiring immediate confidence in the beleaguered troopers. The Union was finally finding its footing. The command structure was intact, the right man was in charge, and strategic ground was being secured. Then the accident occurred. Reynolds, ever the hands-on commander, was near the front lines directing movement when a single wild bullet, a tiny, unfortunate piece of lead fired from some unseen rifle, snapped through the air. It struck him instantly. He dropped from his saddle before anyone could react. The Union's most competent, high-ranking officer on the field had been killed, less than an hour after arriving. It was instantaneous, absurd, and catastrophically timed. The fighting did not stop, but the momentum did. In a war defined by chaotic, poor decisions, the Union had lost. Had just lost the one man guaranteed to make good ones. Command fractured, morale dipped, and the crucial competence quotient of the Federal Army dropped sharply toward the level of a damp sponge. With Reynolds gone, the command fell temporarily to others, including General Abner Doubleday of baseball fame, though that was likely an entirely fabricated later account, but history demands he be mentioned. Doubleday and the 1st Corps fought savagely, holding the western approach against the burgeoning assault. The battlefield was swelling rapidly. What started as 2 Confederate divisions looking for shoes was quickly attracting the entire attention of A.P. Hill's Corps. The Union forces received their next wave of reinforcements, the 11th Corps, led by General Oliver Otis Howard. The 11th Corps had a difficult reputation, mainly because they had recently been thoroughly routed at Chancellorsville. They were placed on the northern flank, a position that history would swiftly prove was far too exposed for a corps already suffering from anxiety. The Confederacy was now fielding 17 brigades, nearly 27,000 troops, overwhelming the Federal 22,000 troops. The 11th Corps, stretched thin and badly positioned, broke first the pressure from two fresh Confederate divisions. Attacking the north flank proved too much. Their collapse was swift, total, and heartbreaking the entire line. The entire Federal line crumbled. Soon after, Act 3, the retreat through Main Street. "We are running!" yelled Private Jenkins, now attached to a fleeing regiment, his voice squeaking with genuine terror and fear. "It is not running, Jenkins," Toby panted, dodging a loose horse. "It is a tactical redeployment toward better ground, which happens to be uphill and away from the people shooting at us." The Federals flooded into the streets of Gettysburg, pursued hotly by the triumphant rebels. This was terrible news for everyone, particularly those holding mortgages, amidst the chaos the town of Gettysburg temporarily transformed into a highly personalized domestic war zone. A few brave, or perhaps deeply misguided residents had opened their homes as impromptu hospitals. One such resident, an elderly woman named Martha, stood on porch. Martha stood on her porch, calmly surveying the scene. Federal troops, eyes wide, with what the Army brass might generously term aggressive repositioning, streamed past her door. They looked mostly like panic. A bullet cracked Martha's window, showering glass onto her porch. She did not flinch. She simply sighed, set down her lemonade, and resumed folding and stacking bandages. "Honestly," she muttered to a neighbor, who was pulling in his shattered garden gnome, "I wish they would decide if they are going to run or fight. This back and forth is murder on the drapes, in the street." The very rearmost Union soldiers, the ones who had not managed to achieve adequate velocity during the repositioning, formed a desperate skirmish line. Billy Yank met Johnny Reb amidst overturned carts and confused chickens. The battle hung, as it so often does, in the balance, swaying toward the side that could run the fastest and shoot the straightest. The Confederates had them on the run. This was it. The Union was broken, scattered, and retreating haphazardly. Toward the south side of town, one last aggressive push, and General Lee would have secured a massive victory on the first day. But then, General Richard Ewell and General A.P. Hill gave an order that baffled many of their own men. They ordered the pursuit to halt. Act 4. The incompetence of vague instructions. General Richard Ewell, a recent promotion and a man with a mind currently operating at about 75% capacity due to a lingering illness, received the report the Federals were broken. They were fleeing up the slopes of Cemetery Hill and Cemetery Ridge, ground that was ominously high and defensible. Ewell, now standing in the conquered town, consulted the last instructions he had received from Lee, which were delivered with the classic infuriating vagueness of high command. Lee's instruction, Ewell, was to take heights. Take the heights south of Gettysburg if practicable. Ewell squinted at Cemetery Hill. The Union soldiers were streaming onto the ridge, panting, but stabilizing. If practicable, well, Ewell mused to his subordinate, scratching his newly formed goatee. Is it practicable, General? Sir, we have momentum. Their troops are shattered. The subordinate insisted. If we charge now, before they can dig in. Ah, but are they too shattered? Ewell asked.
We charge right now.
Ewell interrupted, pulling at his collar. If we charge, and they happen to have a few regiments left, and they fire down on us, that would be decidedly impracticable. He was gripped by paralysis. The Confederate High Command had often relied on aggressive, immediate pursuit to shatter broken Union lines. This time, however, Ewell was too cautious. He paused, waiting for reinforcements, waiting for clearer instructions, waiting for a celestial sign that this was indeed the most practicable moment. A.P. Hill, equally conservative, paused as well. His troops, utterly exhausted from the day's relentless fighting, the pause was the single gift, the single greatest gift the Confederacy ever accidentally gave the Union. While the rebels spent the late afternoon milling about in the streets, looking increasingly confused as to why they had stopped, the battered, demoralized Federal troops were permitted to reorganize on the high ground south of town. General Winfield S. Hancock, one of the Union's most dependable commanders, arrived and immediately saw the potential of the terrain. He gathered the scattered regiments on Cemetery Hill and Cemetery Ridge, forming them into a cohesive, deadly strong line. And what a line it was, looking down from the air. Or perhaps from a slightly higher, non-fatally targeted balloon. The Federal position formed a magnificent structure. Magnificent, natural defensive structure. It ran south from the heights of Culp's Hill, swept across Cemetery Hill, descended along Cemetery Ridge, and terminated sharply at the two small rocky mounds known as Little Round Top and Big Round Top. The shape, to any tactical observer, looked exactly like a colossal metal fishhook, perfectly positioned to snag any army foolish enough to try and bite it. Act 5. The Fishhook of Fate. As the sun began to lower on July 1st, 1863, both sides settled into position. The ground was now quiet, save for the moans emanating from the makeshift hospitals in Gettysburg. The first day of fighting started. The accidental brawl that spiraled out of control had engaged fewer troops than the subsequent days, but the cost was horrific. Over 15,000 combined casualties. The Union had been routed from the fields, briefly headless, and their men forced into a panicked retreat. But thanks entirely to General Ewell's order, to General Ewell's paralyzing adherence to a vague order, the Union had accidentally landed on the best possible defensive terrain in the entire state of Pennsylvania. On the Confederate side, Lee, who had finally arrived on the field and was assessing the situation, was displeased. He had won the day, seizing the town and driving the enemy off, but the high ground remained stubbornly in Federal hands. They are still there, General Longstreet, Lee observed, gesturing toward the formidable ridges. If Ewell had only pressed them. General James Longstreet, Lee's seasoned corps commander, and the man who often found himself tasked with implementing Lee's increasingly optimistic strategies, simply nodded darkly. Longstreet was a realist, often described as Lee's warhorse, but also his primary internal critic. He had opposed this entire invasion, arguing for a defensive strategy. Indeed, General Longstreet replied, his voice heavy. They have secured a position that will be very difficult to dislodge. We have won the battle. We have won the battle for the shoes, but lost the battle for the high ground. The Union, meanwhile, was frantically consolidating. General Meade arrived late that evening, taking command, and immediately saw, appreciating the gift the Confederates had handed him. The fishhook of fate, as it would be effectively known, was secure. Meade issued terse orders. We hold this line across the field. The Confederates were forced to plan an attack against a near-perfect defensive posture. Lee decided he would utilize the full force of his army to try and circumvent the strength of the center by attacking the vulnerable flanks. The vulnerable-looking flanks, the small barb and point of the fishhook. Little did anyone know that on the Union left flank, the commander of the Third Corps, a flamboyant, reckless, politically ambitious general named Daniel Sickles, was about to make a decision so mind-bogglingly bad, so strategically indefensible, that it would manage to save the Union line entirely. But that was tomorrow's problem, as the exhausted soldiers settled down for a night that promised no peace. The two largest armies ever assembled on the continent stared at each other from opposing hills, bracing for a second day that was guaranteed to be even bloodier than the first. The first, accidental chapter was closed, but the story of American incompetence and eventual accidental victory was just beginning.
We'll be on us by sunup.